This episode of the Tactics Meeting is brought to you in part by Gallagher Marine Systems. Gallagher Marine Systems is the industry's most comprehensive source of full-service, in-depth compliance support. And by the Washington State Maritime Cooperative, the only non-profit umbrella plan holder dedicated to oil spill readiness for commercial vessels operating in Puget Sound and the Greater Salish Sea. Formed in partnership with Washington State in 1995 to protect these waters, WSMC has long stood at the intersection of maritime response and environmental protection, supporting safe commerce while safeguarding the coastlines we all depend on. Learn more at wismccoop.org. Well, it's time for the Tactics Meeting, another episode where we talk to subject matter experts about response tactics and technology. I'm your host, Dan Smiley, and today we are doing something different. We have established an all-star cast. Many are veterans of the show, and we're going to be talking about the findings from the National Transportation Safety Board that they published during a public hearing about their findings from the fire on July 5th, 2023 in the Port of Newark aboard the Grande Costa D'Avorio. And to talk about that, we have Jim Elliott with the Teichman Group. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here.
As usual, you're coming to me with from a hotel, right? We did the Area Command show. You were in a hotel in Vancouver. I don't know if you're ever home. Are you ever home?
Rarely. Marriott is my office. So, yeah. So I'm always on the road.
I love that. Welcome. And Mark Curtis with Fairwater, also the president of the Washington State Maritime Cooperative's Board of Directors. Fourth time. This will be your fifth time on the show. You haven't gotten sick of us yet. Mark, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Good to see all of you.
And I love the shirt. Tell us about the shirt.
So when I was working for Crowley Maritime, they got 3 TSP tankers, which is the tanker security plan for the U.S. government. And one of them is the Stena Immaculate. And so I had the pleasure of getting on board the vessel, spending time with the vessel while they were in Jacksonville, Florida. So they gave me a nice polo shirt, great crew, great team. And I wore it today because they unfortunately had an incident in the North Sea where the vessel was at anchor and was struck by a container ship, and there were explosions and fires. So I will try and share what I'm allowed to share. The investigation is ongoing. But just to honor the crew who safely and very, very well performed marine firefighting to the point that the vessel was saved and everybody on board the Stena Immaculate survived. The only person to this point that we know of that had physical injuries was the captain. As they were abandoning the ship, he was the last one to get into the lifeboat. And it turned out he had some broken ribs. So I'm very proud of that crew and what they accomplished and the fact that the vessel survived and that the crew were intact. So that's why we're in this today.
Well, that's amazing. And that's going to be a great story and really in keeping with what we're going to talk about. So thank you for being here. Bill Burket, the Port of Virginia. You were the last episode that I released, so I'm glad we were able to drag you back onto the show to talk about the NTSB findings. Welcome.
And glad to be here. Thank you for that.
And the one person on the show who actually testified at the Coast Guard hearings, as an expert witness about the response that was done on board the vessel. So that'll be great. Thank you.
Well,
Todd Duke, Resolve Marine, also a veteran of the Tactics Meeting podcast. You were the salvage marine firefighting contractor I worked with on the Aleutian Falcon fire, on the Kodiak Enterprise fire. You were there for, I believe, for the Hogue Diamond. So a lot of experience in this. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good to be here again.
And Captain Noah Katka, Seattle Fire, who is currently the chair of the Puget Sound Regional Firefighting Commission, brand new to the show. Thanks for coming on board to talk about this important issue.
Thanks, Dan. So the chair is actually Chief Andy Collins, but I do help support Puget Sound Marine Firefighting Commission. Yeah, that's a great avenue for these types of discussions as well. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the correction. Aaron Patterson, Lieutenant, operates the Seattle Fireboat. First reached out to me after an episode that we did, I think, with Todd Duke, and kind of got me going down this path and interacting with the Regional Firefighting Commission. So I thank you for that, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about the Grande Costa D'Avorio, and the part I'd like to discuss is what the NTSB found as it relates to the firefighting response. Not so much what led to the fire, not the pusher car, but how the fire response took place, and what we need to do better. And as a refresher for those who maybe haven't been familiar with this incident, this was a ship that was loading used cars destined for West Africa. A lot of these cars didn't run, so they were using a pusher car to push them on board. And during the course of loading operations, a fire broke out on the car deck, and the Newark Fire Department responded to that incident and worked with the ship's crew, who did activate the ship's fixed firefighting system. And then after that, everything really started to go wrong. And the big finding, and I think it will be no surprise to anybody that the NTSB found, is that there is a significant, I think they even might have used during the hearing the word shocking, lack of training for shore-based, land-based firefighters for shipboard fires. And Noah, Katka, I know that you've been talking about this for a very long time, this is not a surprise to you. You've been looking for grant money, some kind of funding to help close this gap. So I'll start with you first. What are your thoughts on the NTSB's findings and how it affects your view on shipboard fires that might occur in your jurisdiction?
You know, this is a tragedy that is preventable, and you've highlighted, and the report itself highlights the importance of familiarity with the challenges and the risks in the marine environment. Unfortunately, this type of incident, which is not very frequent, although there's ship fires taking place all over the world on any given day, Newark, New Jersey hadn't had a significant ship fire recently. They didn't have that institutional knowledge. And I think that's true across America. Most, events are infrequent. They're not serious. Oftentimes, the professional mariners that are working on these ships will control the fire, isolate it, and take care of the firefighting efforts. And so municipal fire departments were in a really tough situation of, we have a slide deck of experiences on the land side fighting fires in buildings that don't prepare us for the difference and the unique challenges in the marine environment. And so I hope that this is a wake-up call. I hope that groups like the IFF, Aaron Patterson, who's on this call with us today, he's part of a work group where the IFF is looking at ways to try to get the word out about the risks, and to provide some basic awareness level training. We've got Bill, and we're going to hear from him. He's had amazing efforts in the Port of Virginia, and that all takes money. And you mentioned that federal funds have oftentimes paid for marine firefighting training for land-based firefighters in the Puget Sound region. We haven't been successful in getting those funds since 2020. And as we see the tightening of budgets and all the things that are going on in the federal world, I don't anticipate seeing that money. That could change. There could be a refocusing, but I think that you hit on is one of the roots of this. Is where do those resources come from in order to keep this training going, or to initiate it, and to make sure firefighters and those vessels and crews are safe?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Let's go to Bill Burket, who you testified at the Coast Guard's public hearings about the shipboard fire response. What were your takeaways from the NTSB's findings? What jumped out at you? What was the most important thing you think they said?
Well, again, as we mentioned, the hearing wasn't a big surprise to me, right? They just kind of focused on those three buckets that they really talked about. One was why the fire started, of course, and the port authorities and the folks working the ship. Then a little bit on the construction and the fixed system of the vessel. Then followed up, of course, the big one was the training. The lack of awareness and those type of things. So it really wasn't much a surprise for me, because when I went up there to interview the folks on behalf with NIOSH as an SME with NIOSH, had the opportunity to sit in the interviews, especially with the incident commander, some of his battalion chiefs and other folks, and in addition to the fire chief and some others. So a lot of information that I was hearing, for me personally, was not a surprise. Okay. But, after my investigation and even during my testimony, I saw four major components. One was, of course, a lack of firefighting training, Newark Fire. Those folks know how to fight fire. There's no doubt about it. Land-based firefighters. They know how to do it. They do it every day. What happened was, now they're thrust into the shipboard environment. As we all know, total different animal there. Okay. Everything from command to responsibilities to construction to everything else is different. And so they weren't prepared for that. Also, I mentioned where from the Unified Command, from the ICS perspective, they really didn't use all the functions of ICS as far as divisions and groups and those type of things to really help them manage that. Okay. The third thing definitely was radio communications, right? Radios kept bunking and those type of things. So that was a big thing for them. How do you overcome the radio communications? And the fourth was mutual aid requests, right? They had a lot of mutual aid coming. Time they got the fire knocked down, then they cleared everything. And then, of course, it went through some time. Then mutual aid was then re-engaged. Certainly after they ran into trouble with the multiple maydays and those type of things. And I think I said it on my last podcast. What did you interview me on? As land-based incident commanders, they have to, I don't want to use the word ego, but I will. It's like, we've got it. When we assume command, we've got this fire, right? The land-based fire department. That's just the way the fire service is. All right. And if you got mutual aid coming, I got this. You guys can go, we can clear, we can do this, we can do that. And sometimes we clear these resources sooner than we should, especially on this type of environment. Okay. And most importantly, you have to be flexible and start to receive all the help that you're going to need. In particular, like working with the ship's crew, those type of things, understanding what the ship's crew's doing, understanding when you discharge a fixed system into a space, what that means and how you're supposed to function that, right? But in most cases, a land-based incident commander is not used to that type of input or that type of direction from outside sources. We're the ones used to giving the direction, right? So that's, just trying, in my opinion, getting that word out to our land-based folks to start to do that adjustment, I think it's the big step. And also recognizing that, I understand funding certainly is an issue. It will continue to be an issue, and it's going to probably be one in the near future. But also, I think these fire departments, and it's not just the fire departments, it's all port stakeholders need to come together to help address this issue. Not just the Coast Guard, not just the fire department, not just the SOWRs, the QIs, it's all of us, right? So you can get very creative and get some training going, especially when the folks are on duty, without much money. Just my opinion. That's what I.
Thanks, Bill. You mentioned ICS, so that'll take me to my ICS guru. I think, Jim, didn't you invent ICS?
Years ago. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So. I mean, one of the last shows you were on, you were just coming off of teaching area command up in Canada. When you look at these NTSB findings and you think about how these fires are managed, what is the use of ICS? What are we doing? What are we doing wrong, or what do you have to say about how we're using ICS for these shipboard fires?
I think this has been mentioned with Bill and others, is that the toughest nut is really command and control. You're bringing in different groups of people in a different environment. So the rules of ICS apply, but beforehand, I think it's a preventive measure. Like we've all been working, we go around ports and do exercises, is to learn the players first, build that trust. So that how you're going to work together. There are a lot of egos, as Bill mentioned, and I'm based in Houston, Texas, so we work with the Port of Houston, we work with the Houston Fire Department and Galveston, and there's multiple fire departments around, and trying to pull these different entities together, different ways of looking at the world together to focus on a marine fire is a challenge, really. So out of this, one thing that I guess a positive, if you could say, that has come out of this is now the Coast Guard has a National Marine Firefighting or Salvage Marine Firefighting Task Force. And there's been a lot of focus on building that structure and how we're going to respond to vessel fires. And that includes the ICS command and control component. We could talk for hours about that and how to properly train and equip and get people familiar with these, municipal firefighters, land-based firefighters, familiar with this. Another positive coming out of it is we're working on a video with TransCare to train municipal firefighters. Given the lack of money and time for each one of these departments, these videos will probably give them a baseline understanding of how the process works.
Well, that's great. And I think, Bill, you said in the interview that we did a few weeks ago that, and you just said it a minute ago, the local fire is used to being there on their own. No one else is coming to help. I mean, you might call for mutual aid and you'll get a department from an adjoining city or county or something. But in shipboard fires, you've got the vessel's crew that is actively. I mean, you don't go to a building fire and have building management bunkering up and going up to fight fire on the 14th floor, right? That doesn't happen. But here on shipboard fires, the crews are required to go through basic and advanced firefighting. They do fire drills once a week, along with the rest of their emergency drills like man overboard and abandoned ship and et cetera. They've got bunker gear on board. They're trained to use it. So that's something that doesn't, is different from municipal fires. Shipboard fires last days, not hours. And when you're using the incident command system going into multiple operational periods, that's different from what municipal fire normally does. Municipal fire uses ICS. They have an incident commander. They have a safety officer. They have a logistics officer. But correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, Noah. These incidents generally last an hour to like a 12-hour incident would be a long incident, right? You're
correct.
Changing over to from one shift and handing off a fire to the incoming shift, that doesn't happen all that often, right? To go into another operational period. And then we have a ship fire that's going to go 7, 8, 9 days where we're going into multiple operational periods and we're standing up, planning, logistics, finance. That's not how municipal fire is used to using ICS. You have thoughts there?
Right. Yeah. Sorry, you guys said Aaron? Go ahead.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, this is something that has sort of dawned on me in the last, I'd say, year or two. Captain Katka and I have put on regional marine firefighting training for the last number of years across the Puget Sound and trained, hundreds and hundreds of firefighters. And it's been really good training. The information, we've been on ships, we've gone through, fixed systems and fire control plans, and we've done ship tours and we've laid hose and all that stuff is great. But what I've realized is it's that command level. We're not having chiefs at these trainings. And so, like our chiefs currently, I mean, there's so much on their plate. But they're the ones that are going to be in the hot seat, setting up the unified command. And if they're not up to speed on the marine environment, it's really hard for the line firefighter who's maybe been to these classes. He's at the end of that hose and he's like, what are we doing here? So, I'm really glad that we have this like tabletop exercise coming up that you put together, Dan, and we have some chiefs going to that. And I've been talking to some of our leadership, about these recent incidents and kind of really pushing that, that it's the command and control, like we've been saying, is really important for, setting up a safe scene for people.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this is one of the reasons that I'm motivated to do this. As the executive director of the Washington State Maritime Cooperative, we're the oil spill response umbrella plan holder for Washington, Puget Sound, Straits of Juan de Fuca. So we were involved. We were in the responsible party incident commander seat for the Aleutian Falcon Fire and the Kodiak Enterprise, and we didn't do any better than anybody else, right? We have things to learn. We need to do better, and that's really my whole motivation, is to make sure that my on-call incident commanders can be effective team members when we have the next one, because that's the thing that I'm concerned about is the next fire. We have RoRo members, tanker members, cruise ship members, all different, and how are we going to do this? And that's really the important thing. So yeah.
I think getting back to looking at the what the NTSB put out in their recommendations, Noah and I were a party to the investigation as part of the IAFF group, and a lot of the recommendations that NTSB came out were kind of verbatim what we sent over, and a lot of that is that building those relationships, right? The time to meet the QI or the the local salvage and marine firefighting group, or a port authority person is not at the 2 a.m. at a ship fire. It's at these tabletop exercises. It's at meetings. It's at vessel visits. So that, I think that's a key part of this these recommendations is that that relationship. And I think that the Coast Guard work group that Jim was mentioning, I think that's going to provide some really good guidance. When that comes out, to kind of a framework to build those relationships and in each port.
Great, thanks. I'll turn to my go-to firefighting guy, Todd Duke with Resolve Marine. You were the lead salvage marine firefighter for the Aleutian Falcon and the Kodiak Enterprise. What did these NTSB findings say to you?
So, continuing with the incident command theme, it took a long time for Coast Guard's tabletop exercise and such to embrace salvage and marine firefighting as part of the drills and exercise program. And now, we've finally gotten, we've oil spilled, we've drilled instant command to death using the oil spill responders and the OSROs. And then they brought the salvage marine firefighters to the table, and now we're trying to bring municipal departments, rightfully so, to the table. I think we need to focus a little bit more on that transition from that battalion chief or whatever, from being the initial incident commander to becoming the op section chief or deputy op section chief, depending on the needs of that incident. I've sat with local fire department folks at several of these exercises, and they get quite bored because they're not engaged. We still focusing a little too much on oil spill response in a lot of these exercises. And so that's one of the keys to making sure is we've got to keep those officers engaged during the exercises. If not, they're going to lose interest. They got 1,000 other different things to do. And so they won't attend the next ones. The other thing that's troublesome to me is we need to realize, as someone said earlier, ship fires are going to last days. They're not short-term incidents. They're going to last days. You got to recognize that. You got to start with fire boundaries and deploying that fixed system if the space on fire is protected by the fixed systems, and protecting those fire boundaries. I struggle with people entering ships, local fire entering ships to attack a fire when there's no life safety at risk. There are no missing crew members, there's no missing passengers. So why are we doing this? Is my question.
Well, and that came out of the Grande Costa D'Avorio, right? The captain and the head stevedore both confirmed that everyone was accounted for. They were off the boat, but in the hearings, the battalion chief said, we went in there to search for people. They went in to search for people that they were already told weren't there. And I guess, maybe that goes back to what Noah was saying earlier, is like, hey, we have a playbook, we have an algorithm, and we run it. Noah, your thoughts?
Well, we will take risk in order to save somebody in a ship, in a building, we will take a lot of risk. But we also are there to assist in property conservation. And I think that, you can Monday morning quarterback, what the incident commander and what those crews are thinking about in Newark. But based on what they saw, the fire had been basically under control from that fixed fire protection system, which wasn't buttoned up. The garage door on the top of the boat was open, so carbon dioxide is escaping. And they thought they were going in to mop it up. They thought they are going in there to put out a car fire. And then conditions changed. And so I think a lot of fire departments are going to make that similar decision, because to not go into that space and to say, okay, we're going to leave, the CO2 is going to do its work, sort of, as long as there's, some concentration of it, which with the large garage door open, I don't know how long that concentration is going to stay high enough. It's not engineered for that. So they thought, hey, we're stabilizing this incident and we're going to preserve the property of Grimaldi and whoever has an interest in that ship.
Todd, you want to speak to the fixed system and how long that, how effective that might have been under the circumstances?
Well, as Noah said, there was quite a large opening that never got closed, and so I don't think we can quantify how long that CO2 would have been effective. But the right answer would be work to getting that door closed, however it takes to get that door closed, and then bring in truckloads of CO2 or nitrogen or something like that, or continue to protect the exposures. And I think some of that, because rightfully so, property preservation is high on the list of priorities for fire departments. But that's also lack of understanding of how these things are loaded and how easily it is to get yourself in trouble inside one of these car deck ships. Just the way that they're strapped in and they're tightly loaded in place. So it's just once you get in a dark atmosphere, it's easy to get disoriented, get yourself hung up on some of these straps that are tying these cars down and the like, so.
Well, and I think when you're talking about property protection or protecting the owner, there are other issues in play that people outside of the maritime industry wouldn't be aware of. For instance, if I end up putting so much water on this ship that I roll it over, and that turns into a fuel spill that's 500,000 gallons in the port of Seattle, it would have been much cheaper for the ship owner to have that ship still afloat with the fuel in it and be a total constructive loss and go to insurance than it would be to start cleaning up a huge oil spill that shuts down the entire maritime economy of the state of Washington. I'd rather burn the ship. It's insured. I'd rather lose the cargo. It's insured. What I don't want to do is create a worst case environmental pollution incident in a port like Seattle or LA Long Beach or San Francisco. But that's not how you approach things outside of that kind of environment. I'm going to turn to Mark Curtis, who has a great story of success, I think, for us. And you might actually also, Mark, speak for the first time about the spill management team contractor that responds, because this is not something that happens in land-based incidents of any kind, where an entirely different contracted command and control team funded by the vessel owner comes on the scene. And we'll circle back and talk about the salvage marine firefighting contractor in a minute. Mark?
Yeah, no, I think I know what you're talking about, Dan. I really want to go back and emphasize a couple of things. I've been taking notes. And one of the big things that we were joking about before we even started the recording was if you put a landlubber onto a ship and turned off the lights, the chance of them successfully getting out of there. Now, granted, there are emergency lighting and luminescent stickers, but the chances of somebody who's not familiar with a ship getting off a ship safely is zero. Even a tugboat. Finding your way from an engine space in the dark back to the outer decks is very, very difficult, regardless of the type of ship, whether it's a car carrier, a cruise ship, or a tugboat, is very, very difficult. One of the things, and somebody said it earlier, is you have to trust the crew. I see all of this from the crew perspective. The crew do everything that they can to save the vessel and each other prior to anybody else helping them. They are self-reliant. There are a lot of ship fires that we never hear about because they're not at the dock. You know, a vessel spends most of its life at sea, and fires occur even while they're at sea. You could have an engine room fire, you could have a paint locker fire. So that, to your point earlier, Dan, they do these drills and exercises every single day. My time with the cruise ship industry, I'll call out one particular ship. It's called the Pride of America. It's sailing around the Hawaiian Islands. There is a dedicated firefighter on board. That is their only job. And then there's about 60 other firefighters that report to him during an emergency, and he or she is responsible for training the fire teams on board the vessel, even though they've already had training at, say, the Resolve Training Academy here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where I went and I got my advanced firefighting training. So trust the crew, trust that that team has an incident commander. And when the shoreside, when they finally can get to a dock, that person that's been leading that firefighting can update the shoreside firefighting team. And what's right next to the gangway, always in a metal tube, so it's safe, is the fire control plans for the entire ship. And that should be one of the things that goes and is handed off to the local fire department saying, hey, before you go on board the vessel, let's walk through the fire plans for the vessel. We've buttoned up the vessel. We've discharged the CO2 or the introgen system. Talk to the crew. And you know, yeah, there's always egos. The crew have their egos. The firefighters have their egos. Everybody's got an ego. Yeah. So for me, I think we have to understand that these are professional mariners. They cannot be a professional mariner without firefighting training. So if they are alive and they are there, which we didn't have the crew on board the fishing vessel fire.
Neither one. Yeah, neither one.
Yeah, and so there are those unique circumstances where the fire starts and there's no crew on board. But when the crew are there, the conversation should occur prior to anyone boarding that vessel to understand which areas are safely secured. And in the case of the car carrier, some areas were not able to because the controls were in the fire scene. So I'm going to talk about what I talked about at the very beginning, which is the jet fuel carrying oil tanker and that crew. And I'll bring in the discussions about vendors. Vendors are everything to us. As a private entity, any large organization, private entity, small organization cannot sustain a 3-week, 4-week, 5-week, 6-week response. I would even say 3-day response without our vendors. And we had the great fortune of working with Gallagher on our response. And they came down and joined us in the incident command post, as well as a few other vendors. I'm not going to drop names because I don't know what's appropriate, what's not appropriate at this point. But we had a number of vendors involved, just like we do during every single drill and exercise that we do. It's not just our team, because we understand that we have to hand off responsibilities to, whether you call it an incident management team or a spill management team. A private company has to get back to the other ships. Private company has to worry about being able to make another $1 to pay all the employees, to pay all the mariners that are on the other ships and at sea, while also paying very, very close attention to those who were impacted by that emergency. And so we had 3 executives fly to the United Kingdom, taking care of the crew with our port agents. We couldn't do anything without port agents. And everything was going great because of how the crew responded. But I want to scare you a little bit. This is how it went for me. I was in the gym. It was 6:48 in the morning. I was just finishing up my routine, and I was going to get ready and drive into an office. And Kevin Perry from Gallagher called me, and I can see it I can see it's Kevin. And I answer with, "Oh God, what did they do now?" And he said, "Mark, shut up." He didn't say, "Mark, shut up," but he said, "Listen, this is real. Just listen." He said, "We got a QI call. We know the name of the ship. We know where they are. We got the callback number, and then there were explosions and the call dropped." For the next 90 minutes, myself and our incident management team didn't know if we had a crew, didn't know if we had a ship. They're all the way in the United Kingdom. We knew they were anchored offshore. We had no idea what was going on. We didn't know that they were fighting that fire. We didn't know that the ship was intact. And we formed our internal incident management team. We brought in those vendors, and we started to develop plans. We started to put people on planes. You got to get over to the United Kingdom because we need to have assets on the ground locally. You got to hire lawyers for the location where the incident occurs. Who thinks of that? You have to hire law firms because we have to think about it. Can the responders actually respond? If they're a US-based company and they don't have international contracts, can they physically respond to the emergency locally? If this was in Portugal, if this was in South Africa, are they legally allowed to perform business and work on our behalf in a foreign country if they're not set up to do that? So we had to think about all these different things as part of that response. And a lot of lessons learned were coming out at the time as we were doing things. But I want to give a very special shout out to Tom Weicker. Many of you know him. He is the CEO of Gallagher. And he was, I believe, in Malaysia at the time that this was all going down. I know Kevin Perry was in Singapore. So they were in the Far East. They were helping us along the way while their team was physically in our command post. But we got to the point of handover where the crew members had finished being interviewed. And by the way, they got interviewed and interviewed and interviewed and interviewed. It was the local police department, the UK Coast Guard, the US Coast Guard Europe, and NTSB went over to interview the crew. These crew had just gone through this major emergency, and now they're, tied to all these interviews, hence the need for all the lawyers as well. And they were tired. And so we wanted to return who wanted to go home. Some of them stayed behind and were part of the salvage and marine firefighting to lighter the vessel and go do a damage assessment at a yard so that they could plan a long-term yard period. But we wanted to bring our leadership back too, because we were talking about vice presidents and senior vice presidents and general managers being on the ground in the UK. We wanted to bring them back. And so I reached out to Matt Baer, who was in our command post. And I said, Matt, awkward question. Who can deal with the UK government? Because they are not using Unified Command. They were in charge the entire time of every decision of the emergency component of this fire. And they have one solitary point of contact, and that person reports up to the minister. And I said, listen, whoever it is has to have that range of character, for lack of a better phrase, to understand that we are in their country under their rules, and we need to build those bonds that our incident commander had already done. They were already having daily conversations, but we want to hand off this next component of the face-to-face in the United Kingdom. And Tom Weicker flew from the Far East to London and stood the first watch as that role. And he was there for over a week before Chris Graff flew in and took over from him. So the use of vendors, whether it's salvage and marine firefighting, whether it's the spill management team, as a private company, we rely so heavily on your experience, your knowledge, because we know how to run ships and boats. You know how to do the response. We rely on all of you all the time to be ready, trained, certified, qualified, and be able to go and help support us out in the field. That was a long answer for a simple question, but hopefully I got the point across.
No, that's a great answer. And I think we should turn around speaking of vendors and talk about the salvage marine firefighting contractor, because this is a group of professional firefighters and salvers that are required to be contracted by law and are going to show up on the scene of this ship fire. And organizations like Seattle Fire and Tacoma Fire are familiar with this. They have worked with these salvage marine fire contractors in the past. But I have to assume that there are a lot of coastal port cities that have never heard of a salvage marine firefighting contractor. I know there's a lot of work to do education. Jim Elliott, can you tell us what is the salvage marine firefighting contractor, and what are you going to do when you show up, and what's the time frame? How fast are you required by law to respond?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, there's U.S. salvage and marine firefighting regulations, 33 CFR 155, and there's a time frame for all types of what we call 19 salvage services, including marine firefighting. So I will say, always activate the vessel response plan. Mark talked about that. That's what happened, right? And I listened to the NTSB board over the last few days, and they mentioned that, right? They mentioned that should be done as quickly as possible. Things don't get better with time. So within the first hour, we do a remote assessment. So a lot of times, I know Todd works with Resolve. I work with T&T. We have a standard checklist that aligns with the Coast Guard Salvage Engineering Response Team checklist. And a lot of times we can solve a lot of issues just by talking to the vessel itself, right? They're an emergent situation. As Todd discussed, containing the fire as quickly as possible. I'll mention this. There's the Vessel Carrier Safety Forum just produced a report that said within 10 to 15 minutes, the fire is under control, contain it, hit the fix system. So those types of decisions can be made rather quickly to minimize the impact. Then within 4 hours, we should have external teams and tugs or some type of external firefighting on site. And when I talk about this with port communities and land-based firefighters, it's not just putting water on the vessel. We have a whole suite of services as far as naval architecture, how much water are you putting on the vessel? How do you maintain the stability of the vessel? How can you get that water off, right? So we have pumps that we can pump the water off. Fire water management is a big issue now, so we're very focused on that. Use of tugs, use of other infrared technology, those types of things. And to be named on the vessel response plan, we are intimately familiar with the fire control plan that Mark mentioned, and we work with the vessel crews. So I guess the takeaway is that, we're there, we're part of the process, we're named on the vessel response plan, we understand the fire control plan, we understand how we leverage the value of the crew every time. They understand the ship better than anybody else. And we strive to work with every port in the US and do exercises and training to better understand how we could work together and try to build that trust. With that said, it's very difficult. There's a lot of municipal fire departments around the US, and trying to educate and build that trust is often a challenge. But as I mentioned at the beginning, this National Salvage Marine Firefighting Task Force, the video with TransCare, and just the process of planning that, hopefully will make some improvements on how we're all working together.
Yeah, that's great. Our exercise on June 4th, I hope will take a step in that direction. But we have fire departments, our firefighters from Seattle Fire, Tacoma Fire, Bremerton Fire Department, Longview Fire Department. We're getting a lot of interest in people coming to talk about this command and control version. You'll be there, Jim, to talk. Todd Duke will be there. Todd, you were the team that responded to the Kodiak Enterprise. It happens that you have a warehouse of equipment that is only about a 10-minute drive from that pier in Tacoma in the Halibos Waterway. Can you give us kind of a loose timeline off the top of your head of kind of what arrived when up through the first 6 hours or so? What does that mobilization look like?
So we had on that particular case, our complete firefighting package happened to be sitting inside Trident's yard. So it was literally a 3-minute forklift ride from our Connex box to Pierside. We had an assessor on scene in about a half an hour, 45 minutes, I guess. Within 2 hours, we had a 6-man team that could go on board with SCBAs and the like. And it was important because as local fire continued to pour water onto the ship, we needed to quickly start doing something about it, and so while there was no crew on this particular vessel, we had Trident recall some crew so that we could start adjusting ballast and keep the vessel upright. As you rightfully said, the last thing we want to do is sink a vessel, because that just causes a whole host of pollution issues, as well as loss of utilizing a particular dock, and that can be hugely costly to any port. And so that's one of the things is oftentimes if you're dealing with a foreign crew, Customs and Border Protection comes in and locks the guys up and whisks them away to a hotel or whatever, I don't want that to happen. I want that master, I want that chief officer, I want that chief engineer really close by, because nobody knows that ship better than those individuals. And so, while situation may dictate that we need to evacuate the ship, we don't want to lose sight of where these people go. So that was one thing. We met all of the timelines as far as salvage marine firefighting and having people in place as far as regulations are concerned. Just earlier this week, Monday, Tuesday, I was in Detroit. We had the Great Lakes Marine Firefighting Symposium, probably 250 people in attendance. One of the chiefs from Detroit Fire said, look, in a year's time, I get, 68,000 medical calls, probably 2,000 structure fires, this heavy rescue, and maybe one marine incident, maybe. You look at something like the Costa D'Avorio, that's a once in a career incident for most fire departments. And so this is something that myself, my guys, Jim and his team, this is something that we deal with on a regular basis. This is not a once in a career thing for us. This is every few months we're dealing with a situation, something like that, and so when we show up on scene and we offer the incident commander advice, it should be taken the way that it's given, professionally, from an in-depth knowledge base, from doing this, not the 68,000 medical calls, but because I was on a ship fire 3 months prior to that, because it is so highly unusual for most port fire departments to experience something like this. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at the AIS display, for the Port of Seattle right now, and there are 8 Alaska factory trawlers at Pier 91 right now. There are 2 container ships in the Duwamish waterway. There's a bulker, not to mention the Washington State ferries with hundreds, if not thousands, of passengers running in and out of the Port of Seattle every day. So a port like Seattle, I mean, I know Aaron and Noah, you guys are very concerned about what could happen because, I'm not even looking at Lake Union or the Ship Canal, there are literally thousands of commercial vessels running around within your jurisdiction this very moment. So
yeah, a big thing for myself, and I'm sure Captain Katka is, we don't want to have the same thing happen to our firefighters that happened to firefighter Brooks and Akabo in Newark. And in watching the hearing the other day from the NTSB, there was a point, and I actually wrote it down. It was about hour and 56 in. It was Bart Barnum, who was the lead investigator for NTSB, was asked basically what should have happened. And it was kind of hard to listen to because I know that there were family members present at the hearing. And the answer was so simple. He was like, well, they should have talked to the crew, understood that they used the fixed systems, but they had a problem with the deck 12 door. So they should have assisted them in closing that, given the CO2 time to work, and cooled the surrounding surfaces, and they would have all gone home. So, that's what I'm passionate about is training our fire department, and really driving it home that you got to slow down on these. You got to treat it like a hazmat. You got to get information. You're there to offer assistance to the crew, not take over the whole thing from them and kick them off the ship. So, at the end of the day, if all of our people learn from this training, is if you secure the compartment, you release the fixed fire suppression system, and you just cool the surrounding surfaces, things are going to get better, and you're not going to get hurt. And I think just this last week in Belgium, there was a very similar fire to the one in Newark, and it was on a second or third deck of a ro-ro ship with like 190 cars, and 60 of them were EVs. And this one turned out as it should have. There was a good, quick response from the vessel's crew. They secured the space. They dumped the system. There was good coordination between the port, the ship, and all the external resources. They had tugboats flowing water, cooling the hull. The land-based units supported the crew's efforts of the fixed system, and they kept the fire confined to that one deck, and nobody got hurt. So I think that's a great contrast to what happened in Newark. Is hey, if you utilize the fixed systems, if the land-based units can come in and support the crew's efforts, we can hopefully confine it to that ship, and everybody goes home. So
That's a great point. I'm going to go back. I have one last question, and then I just sort of want to throw it open to the group. I'm sure you all have notes that you took watching the NTSB, and we've had enough of my questions, but I want to go back to Mark Curtis. You guys had a crew success. So let's go back to the Stena Immaculate. Yes, that had the potential to be a worst case. As you mentioned, you didn't even know if you guys had a ship anymore. For those who don't know, that vessel was at anchor, and it was hit directly in the side by a container ship traveling at 16 knots. So basically, it had a big axe wedge rammed into the side of the ship, which could have been completely catastrophic, and likely would have, if not for the quick actions and the training that this American crew had gone to. So that's my setup. Mark, tell us what happened.
Yeah, no, exactly what you just said. They were carrying jet fuel, of all things, which is, if you're going to have a fire, please don't have jet fuel on board your ship. Make it bunker fuel. Bunker fuel is much harder to light on fire, but the metal-on-metal contact of the container ship driving straight through the ballast tank, because we're obviously a double-hulled vessel. It was also an ice-hardened vessel. So that 17 knots made all the difference. If they had just bumped into them, there would have been nothing. But at 17 knots, went through the double hull. One of the cargo tanks was directly impacted, and the heat of the metal-on-metal contact made that first preliminary explosion occur. But the space around it was so hot that all of the ballast tank covers blew off. They immediately turned into steam at such a pressure that they blew off. That's how hot it was out on deck. The crew took immediate emergency actions, and they attempted to battle the fires. I do not have the specifics, but it's approximately 30 minutes worth of firefighting. Oil tankers are a little different. Obviously, they are prepared for fires. There are fire monitors set up. These are fixed stations along the catwalks where the crew members can have, a device that they can point in various directions. And that's what the crew did. They activated not just the hoses, but the fire monitors, and they aimed the fire monitors at the fire, tried to fight the fire to the best of their ability. But to your point, there's an amount of time where you have to do a risk assessment in your head as a captain. You have to do that assessment and say, are we going to be successful, or are people going to get hurt? And this captain very specifically at 30 minutes roughly said, that's it. We cannot fight this fire alone by ourselves any longer. Everybody get to the lifeboat. But what was amazing is all of those firefighting monitors were aimed at the fire scene, cooling down the cargo areas to ensure that it did not spread. Because this, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, of course I am, but there are 16 cargo holds full of jet fuel. This entire ship could have exploded, is my point, if the crew didn't do the actions that they did. In fact, we couldn't get to the vessel, near enough to the vessel, with the permission of the UK government for multiple days, because they were surrounded by firefighting boats and tugs that were just pouring water out onto those decks. This was good because the water's not getting inside the ship like we had with the Tacoma fires. This was just trying to boundary cool around the impacted area. And the fire was so hot that there was never a spill to water. All the jet fuel burned off from that one cargo hold, that there was no pollution event. The only pollution event from that particular one, and we don't know if it's from the container ship or from the from the ship that I was at that time working with, were burnt plastic nodules, nurdles, I believe is the.
Oh yeah, nurdles. Yeah.
That showed up in the environmentally sensitive area. By the way, of course, there was an environmentally sensitive area. They were 12 miles offshore, and the only beachfront was one of the dedicated environmentally sensitive areas. So now they're even questioning, hey, this anchorage, is this the right place for vessels to anchor, given that this just happened? So there's a lot that even the UK are questioning about where vessels can wait for their berth to open up. But if the crew had not done that, if the crew had just abandoned that ship, I have no doubts it would have been far, 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 far worse. But for them to do what they did, there was no time to get fully rigged up for the person that turns on the very first one. The rest of the crew, they geared up, they were fighting that fire and then abandoning the ship when it was appropriate to abandon the ship. If not for their actions, God only knows what would have happened. Imagine, 15 more cargo holds full of jet fuel in this environmentally sensitive area, should that ship have sank or exploded. So, yeah. There's
crew training and preparedness is everything.
It's muscle memory, and I'm looking to Mr. Patterson, Lieutenant Patterson. It's muscle memory. You train for this every day. The crews have emergency drills nearly every day of the week. One of the things that I'm taking away, we're about to have a fleet conference with my new company, Fairwater, and one entire session is dedicated to drills and exercises and not making them repetitive. The fire is not always going to be in the paint locker, but invariably, as a crew member, man, did we do a lot of paint locker fire training or crew laundry lint fires? Because that at that time was where they had the most experience of fires. And they said, listen, we're going to train on what we know. We always have fires here. We always have fires here. And the general public doesn't even hear about the fires because the ship's crew put the fires out. They make notification to class. They make notification to port state. And that's the end of it. But we're gonna focus our training and our drills on that. But we need to step back as an industry and say, okay, well, what kind of fires or damages are happening on other ships and other industries? Because we may want to think outside the box, such as, hey, we're at anchor and we're about to get hit by a container ship. The irony is that there were multiple people on the bridge of the ship at the time just doing documentation and paperwork and updating ECDIS and that sort of thing. And they were able to be in the right place at the right time to activate everybody and respond to this one. But if it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you get your one watchstander, this would have been a completely different situation. So,
I mean, you make a really good point about. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in reading through all the different testimony for the Newark fire, this crew on this ship, they were asked about their training, and all of the answers from the all the different crew was like, yeah, we do these drills all the time, we do these weekly, and but it was always at sea. And they said, well, we don't do them in port because we're too busy loading and unloading. So every time they ran these drills, all those watertight doors were shut. And so they had never done a drill where they had openings, and they'd never practiced doing the manual closing of the watertight door. They knew they could do it. So I think the crew training is important. And I think something as industry is like, clearly there's a hazard when they're out at sea. But when you're at port, that's where we're going to come in and we're going to help. And so, that the ship's crew also has to prepare for, okay, what if we're in port and all these things are open? Just knowing how long is it going to take to get it shut? What do we do if it has a problem? We can't get the door shut. So like you said, Mark, like preparing for different scenarios, I think is key, and not just running the same drill to the paint locker over and over.
I saw Noah put his hand up. I'm just going to make one comment because you're absolutely right. And here's a real life scenario just in the past 12 months. It wasn't a fire, it wasn't an oil spill, but a security incident on board one of the vessels. And they did exactly what the security plan says, and they evacuated the ship. And then they were calling us, and they're like, okay, what do we do next? And because our emergency plans are written the way they are for at sea, I stopped, our incident management team is ramped up and nobody's going back on board until local authorities clear the ship. And they're like, okay, how do we do that? And I said, did anyone call 911? It's not in the vessel's emergency plan naturally, and they are in the, in some of the emergency plans. But for this security measure, they follow a security plan, and it doesn't say call 911 if you're alongside. And so it was probably a 15-minute delay, 20-minute delay, and the port captain person was like, "Oh my god!" And then he got on the phone with the captain. He's like, "Call 911 right now, please." And it turned out, it got routed to normal 911, and it took about 25 minutes before it was routed to the port police department and the port fire department. And this was a potential serious security incident on board a vessel. So for ship owners that are listening, please make sure that there is a caveat in your emergency plans that if your vessel is in a localized port state, such as the United States, know the local emergency number, whether it's 911 or 811, depending on where you are, because it changes. It changes. And there's a section of your vessel response plan where you identify the local emergency numbers and have that ready to go before you even enter the port.
Yeah. And that was a factor in Jacksonville as well. They didn't call 911. Yeah.
Noah, you had a comment?
Yeah, no, I think it goes along with the same lines of what Aaron and Mark are talking about is when we're preparing for these incidents, the ship's crew is doing these drills underway. They're practicing, with their set of equipment. The fire department is training independent, out of that testimony, they looked at the fact that, hey, most of our drills are underway because that's when we have time to train, not during the busy time when we're offloading cargo, onloading cargo, and making money. And I think that's a real challenge for the maritime industry, is making time for the fire department during those critical, periods when they're making money. And earlier at the start of this conversation, Mark was talking about the cruise ship industry being excited about, having the opportunity to drill with the fire service, and that's not always the case. Aaron and I, we both worked many years at a station that some of our ancillary duties and were to prepare for maritime incidents, and asking for the maritime industry to take time for us to pull hose or to do something more involved is a real challenge, but is necessary to prepare for these incidents. And that takes a certain level of trust and cooperation, and maybe stepping back and making that time available, even though it doesn't necessarily fit in with that mission of, hey, we need to offload, onload, and get going. And I think that's something that Bill has worked really well through the Port of Virginia on creating that type of space in order for us to train and to understand. And, Mark earlier, was talking about trusting the crew. Looking at this NTSB report, the crew didn't call for, the qualified individual till well into the incident. They didn't activate the vessel response plan. Did Newark Fire Department know about that stuff? No, they didn't. It was FDNY who came in well into the incident, and they have a much more robust maritime program. And I don't want to harp on money, but I mean, that program is an expensive one. It takes a lot of resources to make that happen. And many municipalities don't have that. And so when you talk about that time and resources, I really think, and Bill being with the Port of Virginia, that cooperation where the port has so much influence over both industry in the port and then resources to be able to push to these other agencies and to bring them together to cooperate. Like in the Port of Virginia, they've got so many fire departments that are able to come together for these joint drills, where it's not just on duty folks, it's not just the local fire engine coming down to a ship and looking at it. But these very complex incidents, even your tabletop, Dan, that you have coming up, that takes resources, say out of that municipality, from Tacoma, from Bremerton, from Seattle, to come to that conference room to sit down and talk, and to make that a priority. And so, I think that's one of the long-term challenges we have, is to set up those systems that is continuing this opportunity for learning and preparedness, so that we understand even, what is that qualified individual going to do for me? What is that vessel response plan? What is TNT and Resolve? How are they going to interact with us?
That very few people know about. And I'm going to steer it towards the cruise ship industry again, because they are very, very large vessels. But twice a year, the U.S. Coast Guard boards the vessels they're in U.S. ports. So they're most likely going to be those embarkation days where some of the guests are leaving and other guests are coming on board. Twice a year, U.S. Coast Guard boards all of the cruise ships, and obviously not at the same day. And they go through and they do a full fire drill. They do a full evacuation and a lowering the lifeboats, and the crew have to drive the lifeboats around and come back up on board. I have never, ever seen local authorities involved on those days. These things are scheduled months in advance because they have to have the teams ready. A lot of the cruise ships dock on weekends, and you're not going to get the normal Coast Guard. You're going to get Coast Guard reservists sometimes. And the Coast Guard will bring upwards of 10 people, 12 people, 13, 14 people, depending on the size of the ship. What might be of value is for each of the local port fire departments to coordinate with the local sections and districts to also be there, if not just to observe how the crew fight the fire. Because I've been there and they have failed vessels before and said, start over, do it again. Now, that means there's 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people sitting in a terminal waiting to get on board the ship that aren't allowed to get on board. Your sailing time is now delayed, which is the worst possible thing because they're not making revenue. But if you are a local fire department connecting with that local sector or district, whoever's running the semi-annual inspections of the cruise ships, that's an awesome opportunity to be like, can we come with you? We'd like to train a few people up and witness how the ship's crew are trained, understand how the spaces are laid out, and the most probable places where that ship's crew think the fire is going to be. Because I probably have been through maybe 200 of these in my life. And every time we say to the fire department, to the Coast Guard, where would you like us to run the drill? And the Coast Guard always say, you guys decide. Okay, we're going to do what's normal for us. We're going to do the crew laundry. We're going to do, the paint locker. But to get to the point of that, it would be an amazing training opportunity if these two public entities collaborated and were there on the same day. I've definitely done a lot of firefighting training on board the vessel with local fire departments. We had my last company had 2 LNG powered vessels. So in the port of Jacksonville, we did a lot of training with the Jacksonville Fire Department. And a lot of these container ships are carrying LNG. So we wanted to make sure that there was a different emergency plan ready, because LNG is a very different conversation. As the tactics meeting had that recording. Oh, Dan, when did we do that? 2 years ago now?
Oh, it's been a while. But yeah, we did that whole thing on LNG. That was great.
Yeah. But I can't imagine a company, and maybe I'm just being very, very optimistic, turning down a request, which means it's kind of on the onus of the public entity, whether it's Coast Guard, whether it's the fire department, even police department. Were coming on board the cruise ships routinely. We had Secret Service, we had FBI, we had everybody on a routine basis, but they always needed a crew member to show them around. And that's going to be the normal thing, is we live there, we work on board, we want the fire out, we want the emergency resolved. That's where we live half the year. That's our house. It just happens to float. Kind of like the ones in Lake Union. But we take pride in our ships, and we want to make sure that the ship survives. We want to make sure that our house, all of our things are there. I don't know how many TVs I brought on board vessels because I could buy my own TV. But getting back to the point, if these things can be coordinated better, what an amazing opportunity for training regularly if you're a port that has multiple cruise ships. For me, with the oil tankers, we always welcome local authorities to come down and watch us. Even if we're doing cargo, we're not going to do a drill during cargo because we don't want to distract from pumping of petroleum products. But we do want to walk you around, and we want to show you how complicated the ships actually are. We're never going to say no. At least the companies that I work for, the places where I work, the answer is always going to be yes. Mostly because we're terrified of what happens if we say no. But yeah, so.
But I think Noah's right, though. I think there are places that would say no. And I think we've given the impression so far that these crews are like, like the Apollo 13 crew, kind of the best of the best of the best. But I remember sailing a second mate where the chief mate really didn't like to do these drills very much. And so we'd call a fire drill and we'd end up sitting in the galley and he'd be like, all right, if this was a real event, Bill and Tim, you're the primary hose team, and Dan, you're going to start the fire pump, and you're going to do this. Everybody got your coffee? Anybody have any questions about how we'd fight this fire? Okay, great, thanks. Everybody go back to work, right? Because it's bad weather outside. We're in Alaska, and then guess what happens when the fire alarm goes off, right? Everybody goes to the galley because you're right. You form muscle memory. We had a man overboard. We do these drills, and we had a rescue swimmer who was supposed to put on a survival suit with a harness and a tagline, and their job was to go in the water once we were close enough and provide buoyancy and keep the injured person's head out of the water, kind of thing. And we'd throw a buoy ball over the side to represent the person who'd fallen in the water so that we could maneuver the ship on it. And when the drill was all over, you'd have to fish this buoy ball out of the water. So you bring one of these big, 20-foot pike poles up on deck. And so the rescue swimmer, they didn't want to get dressed every time, and the chief mate didn't always make them. And so, but they'd bring this pike pole with them along with the gear bag so that when the drill was over, they could fish the buoy out of the water. So now we're in Dutch Harbor. I didn't happen to be on this cruise, but the ship I normally sailed on was in Dutch Harbor. And somebody fell overboard and they sounded the alarm. And guess what the rescue swimmer brings to the deck, right? Anybody want to guess? Pike pole, right? Because people do what they train to do. And so, the fire department is right to be somewhat skeptical when they roll up to the ship as to what is the actual competency of the crew fighting the fire. On the one end, we have this, ocean-going, American-trained crew aboard the Crowley tankers, Cal Maritime, Kings Point, Annapolis grad people who are very serious about their work. And on the other hand, you have, the Alaska fishing fleet, which maybe the guys started off, in the galley and worked their way up, and they've worked at XYZ Seafoods their entire life and know no other way to do it. And everything kind of in between. So just to be fair, not every crew is like the best of the best. They're not Top Gun here all the time. That's not the case.
I totally get that. Like I said, I worked international ships, so it's not even the difference between American mariners and foreign mariners. That's not the case. It is driven by the company and how much the company wants to invest.
Yeah. And often by the personality of the actual officers who were on board the vessel. I mean, I'm sure we see this in everyone's, company. There's that guy who's really into it and they train and they do all their stuff. And then there's the people who are like, I've been doing this for 20 years. We don't need to do this all the time. And they phone it in a little bit, right? And then eventually they phone it in a little lot. We've got them, I'm guilty myself of doing that. I'm sure everybody has done it a little bit on their own. Not Mark, of course. Not Mark. Mark's perfect, but the rest of us.
Gun decking a drill it's easy. All right, you've got your checklist. Just check. Yeah, we would have done that. We would have. I get where you're coming from, and I'm not saying that I didn't work for companies at one point that would do that. What I'm saying is I will never work for companies that do that moving forward. I think everybody on this call has that level of integrity to walk away from a subpar organization or team and understand that the safety of life is the only thing that really matters. The structure can burn down. The property can be lost, but you cannot bring the people back.
Well said. Bill Burket, you've been doing this for a very long time, and you've got a great event coming up in November that I'm signed up for, and I'm looking forward to it. Do you want to tell us about that and how that came about?
Yeah, well, certainly it'll be our third annual or our third National Port Partners Emergency Response Summit. And it all stemmed out of when I was up at the Grimaldi Fire and came back, and my CEO, Stephen Edwards, asked, "Hey, Bill, what can port authorities do to help enhance this?" Right. So, and to the point that most of you know, it just talked about, if you could get your port authorities involved, and I firmly believe the port authorities have a significant role in helping coordinate, organize, pull the folks together like we've been successful here. Okay. So the first one was named the Port Authority Emergency Response Summit, and went very well here at the Port of Virginia. We did the second one this past November in the Port of Virginia again, but we changed the name. We went from Port Authority to National Port Partners because there's more to it than just the Port Authority. It takes all of us, correct? And so, Jim and Todd and a lot of folks who are there greatly support us on this, and it's been awesome. And the other thing we recognize is we feel confident in order for this to be a success, we need to move it around to other ports, right? So that's why we're coming to San Diego the 12th through the 13th. And then we hope to carry it. I think we got one lined up for the Gulf area, but I don't want to mention it until we get a confirmation on that. But we hope to be coming to the Gulf next November, right? But, and again, it's to bring all the stakeholders to address this from an all hazards perspective, not just fire, not just security, but all hazards. And it's also going to include our DoD partners, Navy, so they're very interested in, as we all know, in this whole marine firefighting deal, because they've had some events. So we're just trying to pull it all together to get everybody there. And I mean, it's a no cost event, right? We've got some great sponsors, the Port of San Diego, the Port of Virginia. We've got some others coming up that will be announced. But the Port of Virginia, we're saying, all right, we're the coordinating port, but then there's the host port. And this year, that's going to be the Port of San Diego. And those folks out there, they put a great team together. We're working together to build the agenda. It's going to be a lot of panels, okay, a lot of open discussion. That's really what we want. And to be able to take it from there. So, but that's the event. But, from my perspective, just real quick, I was in Baltimore yesterday. Baltimore had their Marine Firefighting and Salvage Committee together up there in Capital Region in Baltimore. And when you're hearing all the different departments talking and what they're doing, radio exercises that they've done, I am starting to hear, it's starting to resonate amongst not only the port partners, but in particular the fire service folks, the word unified command, the statements working together, how valuable the crew is, okay, how we all need to come together from a regional perspective. So it's gaining traction, okay, it really is. And I think, the NTSB report has a lot to do with those recommendations for the folks that read it. It kind of stirred the interest, and all of us on this line, we've been involved in this event since day one that it happened for the most part. So we got a lot of insight. So I'm seeing some good things come out, right? It's working. So the events, the summit, we have our programs going on here at the Marine Firefighting Schools coming up in May, the 12th through the 17th, our 33rd year in doing it. All right, we got over close to 118 attendees that will be here for the week, and from up and down the East Coast of Gulf, and including from our partners out in the Netherlands, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, they're coming from the fire service. So give us a good broad sweep. So, we're making headway, but I really think the port authorities have a huge, well, not a huge, but they have a very key role here and help and coordinate from that regional perspective, and that's
Bill,
what we're doing.
do you think we can get try to put together a mechanism that includes the ports throughout a region to come up with a funding mechanism for training? I mean, we've looked at grants. I know Seattle Fire has gotten some port security grant money in the past, but that's very hit and miss. It's not, we need a solid stream of revenue in order to do this work. And it can't just be, oil spill plan holders and shippers. It's got to be interested parties, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've been very successful with the PSG perspective, right? To fund our training. All right, and the reason we've been successful is we open a gates, but also the Coast Guard buys in on it, right? That captain, the sector commander, based on what we do and how we're doing it from regional perspective, it always seems to be their number one project when they rack and stack. Okay. Now, as far as the funding piece, I think this is important because I learned this back in the early 90s when we're trying to ramp up the MERT team and get the port authorities for funding. If a port authority or if we want funding, whatever that may look like, and I have no idea, but it's important that it has to be done at all the ports. Does that make sense? Because let's suppose you want to charge a fee for firefighting. I'm just saying a port's going to charge a fee. Well, that could drive commerce to other ports if they're not doing it. Does that make sense?
Absolute sense.
If there's going to be a funding stream, something established, and I'm not even saying that. I don't want Port Authority to state that I'm advocating a tax or a fee or anything like that.
But Bill Burket said.
No, I didn't. But what I'm saying is if something is established, it should be the same thing across the board. So that way one port can't use it against another port from a competitive edge. That's my point, right? So, and some things have been talked about, but believe me, that conversation was very short, like, no. Okay. So anyway.
Yeah. That is a short conversation.
Thought on that.
Jim, you travel all over the country. You're in all of these ports. You're putting together, mutual aid agreements and stuff. What are your thoughts on training and funding? What have you come across that works?
Well, it is a big challenge. I mean, I would say that, as Bill said, it should be consistent across the board, kind of like after Exxon Valdez, there was the Oil Pollution Act of 1990 that required certificates of financial responsibility. I think it has to be a holistic way to do it because it is likely the biggest challenge, right? Time and money. I mentioned it earlier on how to get training and train and equip land-based firefighters and others to respond to these types of fires. One thing that was kind of cool, there's an avenue. I'm on a harbor safety committee, and we're bringing municipal firefighters into harbor safety committees, area committees, to learn about how the whole port operation works and to be part of that unified command. But one of those things that you do in a port, retired Coast Guard, is a waterway suitability assessment. So you do basically a risk assessment in the port. So you're bringing something new in, for example, in Galveston, LNG bunkering operations. I know Mark's very familiar with those types of things. We've found that the local fire department wasn't trained in LNG firefighting. So part of that process was the company that was going to do the bunkering paid for the Galveston Fire Department to get training in that. So maybe controversial, but I think the cost has to be internalized to the process, and pretty complex, but That's one way to do it. I mean, Todd had to jump off the line, but Todd and with Resolve and T&T, we offer a lot of free training, just, going on board ships or doing seminars. We got several set up the coming year, and even getting land-based firefighters to attend, it's a cost, right? And Noah and Aaron can talk to that issue, but paying overtime and all those things that I never would imagine just saying, hey, we're going to provide this for free, right? But it's not. There's an opportunity cost to everything you do. So I don't think I answered your question, but I think it's the biggest challenge. I think we should. We're focused on tabletop exercises and tactics and unified command, all good. But the bigger issue is how to build a robust system to fund municipal firefighters to be trained and equipped to respond to these types of hazards.
Could we?
Go
ahead, Aaron.
Sorry, guys. I just had something to add real quick. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out over the next little bit, but there's the new OSHA emergency response standard that was recently adopted. I don't know when it's actually live, but it basically they sort of took all these different OSHA requirements and combined them into one, and it's going to require jurisdictions to do a risk assessment, basically. And so in areas that have, a port, you have shipping, that kind of all hazards risk assessment, when they identify things, then they will have to meet the OSHA requirements. So for instance, applicable standards to like marine firefighting. So I don't know how much teeth it's going to have, and I've just kind of seen some preliminary stuff. But if the risk assessment is done and it's determined that we have to train our people because we have these ships coming in, that's a thing we've had in the fire department where there's things that are adopted into state law, like confined space response, and so because it's required that we're trained to a certain level, if we have people responding to these incidents, we have annual training that the department doesn't have a choice. Like we have to do this every year. Everybody goes through it. It's documented. But in the Washington Administrative Code, there is nothing that says we must train firefighters to, NFPA 1005 if they're going to ship fires. So I'm kind of hoping this new OSHA standard will have some teeth so that the fire department won't have a choice. It's like, well, we're responding to these incidents and we have to now train to meet this standard. So we'll see what happens. But, for our department, unless it's legally mandated, there's so many other things that take the time and the training dollars.
That's a really good point. Well, we're kind of out of time here. We could go on forever. I know others have got things that are coming up. I'll just go quickly around the room for some closing comments. Anything that you didn't have a chance to say up to now, go ahead and say it now, and we'll start with Captain Katka. Noah?
Dan, thanks so much for caring about this issue and bringing us together today. This is, the Grande Costa D'Avorio fire is a startling case study. It's scary to me, and I think it should scare all of us that this could happen in our community. And so, I want to continue to figure out a path forward to making sure this doesn't happen again. And I think these kind of conversations, as well as, the work we're doing with the Puget Sound Marine Firefighting Commission, looking for future cooperation, funding, coordination, in order to train and prepare for this. So thank you.
You're welcome. Bill?
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me, and I really appreciate the discussion. And I think we're all, flying the same flag and beating the same drum, right? And to me, what it boils down to is the familiarity that the land-based firefighter and incident commander has to obtain and be able to reset their mindset to allow for help, allow for input, understand they're not completely in charge, right? When they show up to a vessel fire, these type of things. And that's going to take a little bit of work, but that's starting to change. Okay. And if we get that nailed down, because the folks in Newark, just like as 31 years in the fire service, if I'm told that on floor 10, that's where the fire started, and I had not been on floor 10, what do? We immediately go to it and check to see what's going on. But unfortunately, on deck 10, where the system was discharged, they did not understand basic CO2 fixed system operation. So it was just natural for them to go in there and check it out without any other knowledge about really what should have been done. Okay. So we got a lot of work to do there. But the last thing I would like to say, our brothers and sisters in Newark Fire, they are still living this fire every day of their lives. And I can tell you that for a fact. All right. They're still hurting. Okay. And we just have to remember that for them. All right. And so, great. They're good people. They know what they're doing. Just they got in a situation that they were unfamiliar. And then unfortunately, and if you look back to Jacksonville, you look back even for us here to Spirit of Norfolk with the Maydays, you look at the Bon Bouchard. Unfortunately, it was coming. What happened was coming. Just unfortunately, they're the ones that drew the short end of the stick. Okay. So anyway, I look forward to future discussions. Just let me know how I can help.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for all your work on this. And I look forward to seeing you in San Diego. Jim, your final thoughts?
Thanks, Dan. I again reiterate thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me join the discussion. I think it would be value for all your listeners to actually listen to the NTSB hearing and decide for themselves. But there's some very basic things, that need to be properly trained and equipped to go on board a ship that's on fire. You need to leverage the value of the crew. They know the ship, as we said again, better than everybody, and know that I'm biased. I'm a Marine Salver, so I encourage you to everybody that's listening to activate the vessel response plan. Fires typically don't get better with time, right? So the sooner you respond, the sooner you get a unified command together and work as a team to contain and put out the fire, the better. But thanks again. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jim. Mark Curtis.
I'm going to kind of echo what Bill just said. There's a great deal of thanks that we owe to the fire departments around the country, to all emergency responders, fire, EMT, police, and I forget what the actual phrase is, but we want to thank those that run into the danger. So my final thought is thank you all.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for your
And Aaron, you're the lad. You kind of got me involved in all of this. You sent me a message after listening to one of the podcasts and let me know that drill was going on in Tacoma. So this episode and this effort, at least on my part, is largely thanks to you. So you get the last word.
Oh, wow. Appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks again for having me on. It's really unfortunate that tragedies like this is what it takes to, put training in the forefront and make changes, in the fire service. So many things that we do today we're trained for because, someone paid the ultimate sacrifice. So, that's why I'm so passionate about this. And to all the firefighters listening, and just say, educate yourself about the marine environment. It's different. And if you can remember one thing, just confine the fire, use the fixed systems, cool surrounding area, and use that ship's crew for information. So, I think there's a lot of good momentum across the country right now, unfortunately, because of all the recent incidents. But, there's things happen at the local level and the state level and the federal level. There's some good training that's going to come out. And I think there's going to be some good resources for people on the front lines to educate themselves. So thanks for being part of that and getting this panel together.
Thank you, Aaron. Everybody, other firefighters, remember, don't sink the ship. Just don't do it. Other than that, we're done here today. I'm sure you guys have other things to do, so get back to work. If you're getting value from the tactics meeting, whether it's maritime safety, environmental insight, or just good conversation, consider supporting the show. We're a lean crew with a big mission, and your support helps keep the command post running smoothly.